Continuing on with the one underrated player from every team series, we now have the Metro Division. I did the Atlantic in the last video. I'm just going to go in order. So next video will be the Central, and then we'll finish off with the Pacific Division. So with that being said, let's jump right into the video. Starting off with the New York Rangers, I decided to go with Kevin Hayes. This is a guy whose name has been in trade talks pretty much throughout the whole season and heading up towards the trade deadline. 26 years old, a big center, and I think this is a guy that could really benefit a team that is trying to win now, and I also think he could be a big part of a team's future because he is only 26 years old. He was a first-round pick, 24th overall by the Blackhawks in 2010. He's only played an NHL game, though, for the New York Rangers, 354 games played, 85 goals, 126 assists for 211 points, some pretty good numbers, and this year he's on pace to have a career high in points by far. 44 games played, 12 goals, 25 assists for 37 points. It's looking like he's going to put up 60 plus this year, and I definitely think he does have some decent trade value, but I wouldn't be surprised if the New York Rangers do keep him around because, like I said, he's only 26 years old. I think he can be a piece for this team, moving forward. By the time the rebuild's probably over, he could be around 28 to 29, still in his prime, so it's going to be interesting to see what the New York Rangers do decide to do with Kevin Hayes because I do think he will be worth a lot on the trade market. They definitely probably will get some interesting offers, but I think he's a very underrated player. He's defensively responsible and obviously putting up the numbers to go along with that this year, so that's why I decided to go with Kevin Hayes. Next up, I decided to go with Travis Zajac of the New Jersey Devils. Now, a lot of people might not agree with this one. He's 33 years old. I just think he plays such a huge role for the team. He's like Kevin Hayes. He's very defensively responsible. He can kill penalties. He was a first-round pick back in the 2004 NHL Draft, 20th overall. Over the course of his career, 892 games, 179 goals, 313 assists for 492 points. Obviously, the numbers don't really jump out at you. He's, 400 points away from being a point-per-game player. But this year, 50 games played, 12 goals, 19 assists for 31 points, and he's quietly having a very good season for the New Jersey Devils, but I just think a lot of people aren't realizing it because the team is having such a rough season altogether. Most guys on this team are just really not having the best years, but Travis Zajac is quietly having a very good bounce-back year, and I just think he plays such a big role for this team, and, without him, I don't really know where they would be this season because he is giving them some pretty solid offensive production, so that's why I decided to go with Travis Zajac for the New Jersey Devils. Next up for the Carolina Hurricanes, I went with another veteran player, Justin Williams, the 37-year-old winger, and it just seems like this guy is ageless. First round pick, 28th overall back in 2000, 1,215 games played, 302 goals, 462 assists for 764 points. I honestly think this guy has a good shot of being a Hall of Famer when it's all said and done, but he really isn't done yet this year. 53 games played, 13 goals and 18 assists for 31 points. Obviously, he was named captain of the Carolina Hurricanes this year, and I think that was an amazing choice. I think Justin Williams just brings that winning pedigree to your team, and he's still putting up some pretty solid numbers. It seems like he's a guy that every year can give you 40 to 50 points. Maybe not so much in recent years, but this year, he's on pace for a pretty good number. It's looking like he's probably going to hit 50 points this year, which is a good sign for the Carolina Hurricanes, who are a team that is trying to make that push into the playoffs. Obviously, I'm sure they wish they could go back and undo some of the trades that they did make this offseason, but nonetheless, Justin Williams, I think, is just a very underrated player just because he plays such a solid role, and I think he's such an important part of this team that it kind of gets overlooked because when you talk about Carolina, the main focus is on guys like Sebastian Aho, obviously the newly drafted Andrei Svechnikov, and Teuvo Teravainen and all those guys, but I just think Justin Williams really is a huge part of the team that gets overlooked. That's why I decided to go with him as the underrated player for the Carolina Hurricanes. Next up, the Philadelphia Flyers. I went with Sean Couturier. Now, this is a guy who I honestly think is one of the most underrated players in the entire NHL. A few months back, I made a video on 5 underrated NHL players. He was on the list. I just think he's extremely underrated because he gets overlooked by Giroux, Voracek, and all those guys, and now Carter Hart, who's really been a sensation there in Philadelphia. But Sean Couturier really has just been amazing the past couple of seasons, and he's a great two-way forward as well. I definitely think he will win a Selke Trophy throughout the course of his career sometime. He's a first-round pick, 8th overall in 2011. He's 26 years old. Over the course of his career, 549 games played, 122 goals, and 189 assists for 311 points. This year, 51 games played, 21 goals, 23 assists for 44 points, well on his way to another 70-point season. And I think that really is huge for this Flyers team, who is really starting to turn it around now. That's large part due to Carter Hart, but I think Sean Couturier has just been a steady, consistent guy throughout the past couple of seasons, one of the best two-way forwards in the NHL, like I mentioned. And I just think this guy really doesn't get talked talked about enough for what he does for this Philadelphia Flyers team, and that's why I think he's the most underrated player on the team and one of the most underrated in the entire NHL. Next up, the Columbus Blue Jackets actually decided to go with their backup goaltender Jonas Vassallo. Now, I think once Bobrovsky leaves, either at the trade deadline or this offseason, because I definitely think that's written on the wall, I definitely think that's for sure going to happen, I think their goaltending job is going to be in very good hands with Jonas Vassallo. I think he's one of the most underrated young goaltenders in the NHL. He's 24 years old, was a third-round pick, 62nd overall back in 2012. Over the course of his career in 83 games played, he has a record of 40, 28, and 8, a 2.89 goals against, and a .908 save percentage. And this year, he's putting up some pretty decent numbers as well. 20 games played, and he's 9-4-2 with a 2.95 goals against. You wish that could probably come down a little bit, but for a young goaltender, he's still going to get better, and he has a .908 save percentage. So like I said, I think it's written on the wall that Bobrovsky is going to leave this team eventually, and like I said, I definitely think it's in good hands with Jonas Vassallo. He reminds me kind of a guy like UC Saros, where I think he's going to eventually take over that starting spot in Nashville, and I think it's the same for Jonas Vassallo, but his is probably going to come sooner rather than later. With the situation going on with Bobrovsky, he's been pretty consistent throughout the course of his young career so far, so I really just think he's one of the most underrated young goaltenders in the NHL that doesn't really get talked about all that much. Next up is the Pittsburgh Penguins. I decided to go with Patrick Hornqvist. I was going to go with Jake Guentzel, but he is a guy who I do think gets a lot of recognition for what he does. So I decided to go with Hornqvist, another veteran. He's 32 years old, and I just think he does all the little things very well. He's a guy that I'm sure a lot of people in the NHL just hate to play against. He's very physical. He really is a power play specialist. He was drafted in the 7th round, 230th overall back in 2005. What an absolute steal that was. 689 games played over his career so far, 218 goals, 219 assists for 437 points, and this year, 40 games played, 15 goals, 11 assists for 26 points. He seems like a guy who just consistently throughout his career puts up 20 goals, a couple 30-goal seasons here and there, but Patrick Hornqvist really just does his job very, very well. Like I said, power play specialist. He can go out there, be physical with the other team's best players. He can kill penalties. He can really do it all. That's why I think he's a very underrated player, because obviously when you think of Pittsburgh, all of the media coverage is around Sidney Crosby, Malkin, Kessel, and Letang this season with the Norris Trophy caliber year that he's having. I just think Patrick Hornqvist flies under the radar and really does his job very, very well, and that's why I decided to go with him as the underrated player for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Next up, for the Washington Capitals, I decided to go with Jacob Vrana. Now, if you were to ask me this question last year, I probably would have said Nicholas Backstrom, because it seems like throughout his entire career, he's been an underrated player. But I think for that reason, with so many people kind of calling him underrated, it doesn't really make him underrated anymore, if that makes any sense, because he is getting a lot of recognition. He's one of the NHL's most elite playmakers over the past decade. So I decided to go with a new player, Jacob Vrana, 22-year-old, first-round pick, 13th overall back in 2014, 147 games played so far in his career, 32 goals, 32 assists for 64 points. Obviously, he's a very talented offensive player, and this year he's really having a breakout season. 53 games played, 16 goals, and 15 assists for 31 points, on his way to probably having around 25 goals, which I think is huge for this Washington team, because, a lot of people kind of criticize him as being top-heavy, but they really showed that they weren't with the depth that they showed in the postseason last year on their way to their first Stanley Cup, and I think Jacob Vrana just takes a lot of pressure off of the big guns on this team, and he kind of flies under the radar, because I don't really hear a lot of people talking about him this year, but he really is quietly having a very, very good breakout season for this Washington Capitals team, so that's why I decided to go with him as the underrated player. I just think he really does his job well, taking pressure off of the Capitals' big scorers like Ovechkin and Backstrom, and I think he's going to be a very good player, because he is only 22 years old. Next up, saving the best for last, which is pretty crazy to say considering the Islanders are the best team in the Metro Division. If you were to tell me that heading into the season, I would have said you're crazy, but I decided to go with Ryan Pollock. A lot of people say Pollock or Pollock. I'm just going to go with Ryan Pollock. I don't really want to butcher his name, but if I did get it wrong, make sure to let me know. He's 24 years old, a defenseman, first-round pick, 15th overall back in 2013, and he really is looking like a very promising young defenseman. Over his career so far, 136 games played, 15 goals, and 33 23 assists for 58 points, and this year he really is having a breakout season. 52 games played, 3 goals, and 19 assists for 22 points. The leading point scorer defenseman on this Islanders team. He logs pretty much the most minutes on a consistent basis, and you gotta think, this guy is probably the best defenseman on one of the best teams in the NHL as a 24-year-old, so I definitely think he really is having a huge season that's kind of flying under the radar, because, you know, even though they're one of the best teams in the NHL, not a lot of people are talking about the New York Islanders, and they're in a division with the Penguins, with the Washington Capitals, and they're ahead of all those teams, which is very, very impressive considering they lost their franchise guy in the offseason. But nonetheless, Ryan Pollock is having an unbelievable season on their blue line, and I think a lot of people should start talking about him more. He's still young, and I think he's only going to get better. So that is going to wrap up the video. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Make sure to let me know down in the comment section who are your picks. Obviously, if you don't agree, you don't have to hate down in the comment section. This is purely just my opinion. I'm very curious to hear what you guys think down in the comment section. So with that being said, I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel for daily NHL content. And I will see you guys all in the next video.